Hey everybody, good evening. Ravings and Cravings here, otherwise known as Ruth Hartunian Allenbaugh, here with you to talk about food sensitivities today. I'm here with Cindy Sullivan, who's a registered dietitian. She has her master's in public health, and she's a certified health education specialist. She in her bio that she sent me, I like this. She says she has cooked over 7,000, probably more now, dinner meals for her food sensitive family. She has experienced modifying recipes, batch cooking, freezing, and doing more dishes than she can count. She is a passionate, practical nutrition educator who loves to teach nutrition. Her vision is that every family will eat at least one meal together daily, which nourishes their body and spirit so they can go out and change the world just because we fueled ourselves properly. So this is a strategic interview because Cindy is going to talk about entertaining and the food sensitivities and people who have sensitivities and the holidays and how anyone can still celebrate no matter their dietary needs. So she's going to tell us a story about how she landed where she is, and then we're going to go from there. So Cindy Sullivan, welcome to WILI Radio.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I do want to get started just with my story so that some of you will know where I've come from. And it begins with my son lying on the couch in pain. My second grade son was having 2 to 3 migraines a week. And over the next couple of years, as we tried to get to the root of the problem, he was on 4 different restrictive diets.
Wow.
I had already learned about cooking for food sensitivities when my husband had brain fog and abdominal bloating and fatigue. And after testing and an elimination diet and many months, he knew what he could eat to feel good and what would make him dysfunctional and lying on the couch, which is why I want people to have energy to feel good. Years later, I had him to feed, as well as an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, and the diets kept changing.
Ooh.
But when you have an 8-year-old in that much pain, giving up isn't an option. I wanted him to be able to use the many gifts and talents that God had given him instead of just lying on the couch. I was tired. I was tired of constantly looking for and modifying recipes only to have them taste bad. It took a lot of time and energy to cook all the time, and I was starting over again with few meals we could eat. One day I was in the kitchen of my good friend whining to her about how bad the dinner was I'd made the night before.
Ooh, what was it? Do you remember what it was?
I don't even remember. I just knew that I'd spent all this time cooking, and it just was bad.
That's sad.
And she turned to me and she said something I've never forgotten. She said, "I can't think of a better person for this job." Did I hear her right? I don't want this job. Part of me did not want to do this anymore. But when you have an 8-year-old in that much pain, giving up isn't an option. So I put on my dietitian hat and my mom hat. I went to the grocery store and I got to work. And I began slowly to find new recipes. I always cooked extra when something worked so that I could throw it in the freezer so we could pull it out when we needed a quick meal. And it took me several years to kind of put everything together, but the results were worth it. So I've been on this road. In my family, we have allergies, we have sensitivities, and intolerances, which I cook for regularly.
And those are those all different things?
They actually are.
They are.
If you look at an allergy, people can have things like hives and anaphylaxis, so it can be life-threatening. Most sensitivities will go to also involve the immune system. They'll have repeatable results, like you might always get migraines, for example, or some people get just brain fog or abdominal bloating. So it's immune sensitive and they're repeatable, but they're usually not life-threatening. They're not anaphylactic reactions.
I see.
And then the intolerances, most people are familiar with lactose intolerance. And so that would be what most people would be familiar with. They're lacking an enzyme. The immune system isn't involved. It doesn't mean you don't have symptoms. It's just a different kind of involvement.
I see.
But all 3 of them are challenging to work with. But when you go to modify family recipes, I will tell you it is challenging and it is not for the faint of heart. It takes some time and patience. And depending who's coming to celebrate with you or where you're going, people have different food personalities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with the holidays, we cook special things, we bake special things, and we we visit with friends and family, and I'm looking forward to how you're going to unpack this because, if I arrive somewhere and there's nothing I can eat, that's just got to be a very sad thing, like what am I doing here? Why am I here? What am I celebrating? I'm not enjoying anything with anyone. So I'm very excited for you to tell us about what we can do in these situations.
Exactly. And a lot of it comes down to communication and talking with people. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But it also depends on who's coming. So for some people, food's really not that important. It's not a big deal. Other people, it's pretty important. And other people, that's the main reason they're there, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not quite, but
Yeah.
And so it partly depends who's there and what their feeling is and what your family or your friends' feeling is about food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's also going to depend who you're cooking for, what it is. If you've got an allergy you're cooking for and that person is either airborne or contact, you have to do a lot more cleaning. Some people, just by touching food, can break out
Oh my.
or have anaphylactic reactions.
Mm.
You have to do a lot more cleaning in that case than if they can just ingest it. You have to be careful of cross-contamination, but it's not such a big deal. Or with the sensitivity or intolerance, you can just tell them they can avoid it, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that depends.
And are some foods harder to avoid than others? Like what are the big ones?
Some of them are fairly easy, believe it or not, and some of the ones you hear about, like dairy is hard this time of year because there's so many holiday foods are cheesy or creamy.
Yeah.
But some sneaky ones that are hard are soy and corn, especially because of the number of foods that they're in. So if you start reading labels, there's soy in a lot of things, and there's corn in a lot of things. So you're going to have to read your labels, look at a different brand of something, or there might be a different product. Like instead of soy sauce, it might be coconut aminos. But you have to be aware that they're a little bit sweeter than soy sauce, but they do boost that umami, that savory kind of taste. Or you might do that with something like mushrooms or Parmesan rinds or tomato paste. So there are other ways to do it, but initially you're like, oh, I can't put this in my recipe. What do I do?
Well, and you offer yourself as a resource to people, and so at this point, I just want people to know how to contact you if they have questions, because maybe their wheels are turning and they're saying, "Oh, I would love to ask Cindy this question." So how would they contact you?
A couple different ways they can contact me. The easiest one is by email, and it's Cindy at foodsensitivityKitchen.com. That's my email address. You can also go to my website, which is foodsensitivityKitchen.com, and there's a way to contact me there, as well as lots of resources. And then I have a podcast called The Sensitive Kitchen, and their episodes are very short, and I mostly talk about one recipe in those, and then talk a little. I'm a dietitian, so I talk a little bit about why might you want to make this, what's some nutrition benefit of making this recipe, and then how you might modify it for different kinds of food sensitivities. You've got somebody who's allergic to dairy, or somebody who is sensitive to soy. What might you have to change in this recipe?
Can I throw a couple of ideas out at you, see what you would do for a sensitivity or an intolerance?
Sure.
Well, I like deviled eggs made with mayonnaise, usually pickle relish, some mustard. What would you do to do a nicer version of that for someone who has some kind of food issue?
Believe it or not, that one is fairly easy, because if you're allergic to eggs, there's nothing you're going to do. I mean, you're going to stay away from those.
Right, yeah.
So the pickle relish, there may be some chemical sensitivities, but usually that's pretty good. Like we have to buy, my husband is sensitive to certain chemicals, so I have to go buy organic because they put polysorbate 80 in everything.
Oh, wow.
So that's one that we personally have to be aware of, but most people aren't. So you're pretty good there. And then it's probably going to depend on the kind of oil in your mayonnaise. Is probably the biggest thing, and then you have to check, because some mayonnaises will have, for example, corn in them.
Really?
Or some will have, it will be like a thickener sometimes, or corn syrup, depending if you're using like a Miracle Whip. And then sometimes it depends if people are sensitive. Most oils people are okay with, but not always. Okay? So if you're using a mayonnaise, for example, that has olive oil in it, my husband would like to know that because he's really sensitive to olives and olive oil. So you're really going to have to talk to whoever you're serving if you know that they're sensitive to something and say, okay, tell me, not just gluten, tell me what else, and ask what else. Because sometimes they don't want to be a pain, but if you can just buy a different jar of mayonnaise and solve the problem, you're good to go.
What's another popular food that we would have during the holidays that you've tweaked?
I think, let me tell you a hard one, and that is I do a lot of bread baking, and I'm still struggling with gluten-free bread that is as wonderful as regular bread.
That's
I will
hard.
take a pizza crust and put 8 different kinds of flour and enhancers and all this stuff to make it wonderful, and it's still not as wonderful. So gluten just does something special, and if you're going to do gluten-free, be sure you're using gluten-free recipes. Don't just take your normal recipe and try to put gluten-free flour in it. Sometimes it works for a few things. It does work for some muffins and quick breads, but if you're trying to make a bread, that one's a really tricky one.
How about things like macaroni and cheese? What about dairy-ish things? How about something like that?
Yeah, I actually have one of my students developed a macaroni and cheese that has a little bit of pumpkin in it, but you wouldn't know, it's just a little bit of pumpkin in it, that is gluten-free and that is dairy-free, and that is on my website. And you have to be careful how you're going to do it because, for example, some of the gluten-free pasta, if you cook it too long, turns to mush. Well, if that happens to you, you can't make macaroni and cheese because it's mushy. Right? So you do have to be a little bit careful of cook it a little al dente, and sometimes you have to use certain kinds of gluten-free pasta. I found, unfortunately, one of my favorite brands is one of the most expensive, but it holds up really well. I just made some macaroni and cheese this week, in fact, with it.
Do you ever make anything with that einkorn wheat at all?
I have not, and it is gonna be a wheat. Actually, I take that back. I have, and I've eaten some products with it, but it is going to be a wheat versus like a buckwheat is actually a different grain, and people who are gluten-free can eat that.
It's very complicated, but that's why you're here to unpack this. So I'm gonna say, okay, what is really on your mind as far as what you would like to tell listeners? I'm not even gonna ask you a question. I'm gonna say, you know what, maybe you have something that you really think that we should hear. So we're ready to listen.
I would say it depends if you're having people over for one meal or a whole day or a holiday party, or if you're actually having house guests, right? And I think you have slightly different strategies, but the main thing is to talk to them, okay? Talk to people who are coming, for example, for a family meal or a friend meal. What's really important? What do you really want to have? And maybe they don't care about having stuffing, but they really want sweet potato casserole, okay? What's really important? In other words, what can you, between the two of you, I would try not to do everything yourself, because if you're not, a lot of times when you do cook for food sensitivities or food allergies, you end up cooking a lot from scratch. And if you're not used to doing that all the time, it takes a lot of time and a lot of dishes. And so get some help with dishes. Make dishes fun. Have some people in there who are willing to help. Get help ahead of time, right? Have them say, oh yeah, I'll help you. And have somebody actually help you do that. Sing songs, play games when you're doing whatever. But who will help you bring food? Sometimes it's just easier to have the person who's allergic say, I'll bring these 2 things because I can eat turkey, it's no problem, or ham or whatever it is. But, I'll bring the potatoes, or I'll bring, so they may want to bring 2 things. If it's kids, I suggest you think about, do you really need to replicate the cake and make 2 cakes? Okay? A kid might be just as happy with a cupcake or their favorite kind of candy or a bowl of ice cream and not feel like they're left out because that's their favorite thing. And that works really well for other people too. Sometimes they're a coffee person. If you give them the best cup of coffee, they're happy. Or a really nice piece of dark chocolate and some fresh raspberries is really a treat. So, but you really need to talk to them and say, what's important? How can I want to serve you. And yet at the same time, I disagree with Ina Garten. Ina Garten says everybody who comes should be able to eat everything. And
really? Is that really what she says?
that is what I read just recently.
Oh.
And I'm like, she does not live with many people.
Oh, my goodness.
Either that or she has a lot of help with her dishes and a lot of help
Probably,
cooking.
yeah. Well, I spend a lot of time with internationals, and they are not like your all-American kind of person. I never ask them if they have any issues. Everybody eats peanuts. They eat dairy. They eat everything. But if I am entertaining others, I will ask them ahead of time before they come if there are any issues. And even when people come in my house, I even say, you know what, try it a little bit. And if you don't like it, then it's okay. Just don't take a lot. Just to try things, it's all right. I'm going to guess economically that this lifestyle of eating like this has got to be pretty expensive.
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
The food is more,
okay?
But you don't go out to eat very much.
Because you can't find stuff to eat?
And you don't know what's in it.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yes and no. I spend a lot more on groceries, but my eating out budget is very small.
Oh. Is there any chain thing that you could recommend? Like anything that I have here in Connecticut? So Cindy's in Michigan, and we're doing this recording over Zoom, so we can see each other, but radio people can't. So is there anything that you could recommend?
In terms of sensitivities and like chemical sensitivities, Panera is actually really good. They have taken out a lot of chemicals on purpose. They have like 200 chemicals they've taken out of their food on purpose.
Wow.
And so I always recommend them.
That's amazing.
They're really good about it. And a lot of restaurants, if you're just going for one thing, they're really pretty good about it. It's when it starts getting complicated, like you have to look for soy, and you have to look for dairy, and you have to look for gluten, that it just starts getting really hard.
Well, would you like to name off some things that are really good to eat I'm looking at this handout in front of me. You have some breakfast options, you have make-ahead dinners, you have desserts, you have so many different things here. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about some of the things that you would suggest for people with, what would you call people with sensitivities? Would that be?
I group them together and call them people with food sensitivities, but some of them have allergies, and some of them have intolerances, and we don't really have a term for everybody. A lot of people just call them food allergies, when technically they're not allergies.
Okay.
But probably most people call them food allergies.
All right.
Is what most people call them. But yeah, so if you start with breakfast, for example, there's a blueberry banana baked oatmeal on my website that is wonderful. I've got like 3 or 4 versions of granola, some that are nut-free, some that are gluten-free, some that are higher protein. There's a great chia pudding and a flaxseed pudding. It would be really fun if you're having house guests, for example, to do chia pudding and flaxseed pudding, keep them overnight, and then do like a cold breakfast bar. Do those with a whole variety of toppings, fruits, nuts, seeds, granola. It would be a fun thing to do, and nobody would even know that you were avoiding whatever it is, dairy, gluten, whatever it happens to be. You might start with a soup. I've got a great butternut squash soup recipe that almost anybody can eat. And there's 2 versions of a non-dairy creamy potato soup. One is sweetened with cashew cream, and one is sweetened with a can of white beans, depending if you can eat nuts or not.
Oh, yeah.
And you can have them cold, you can have them hot, and then you can put all different kinds of things on top, depending what people can eat.
I'm hungry.
Some people really miss the crunchy when they can't eat nuts.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So I have a really good maple roasted pepitas with cranberries, and it is just wonderful. And you bake it in the oven, and you have it, and keep it airtight. It'll keep for a couple of weeks, and you can pull it out. So if you've got people who are nut allergic coming over, it's a great option.
Ooh, and I see you have a dairy-free fudge.
I have a dairy-free fudge. It is made with sweetened condensed coconut milk, and it is easy to make. There's no cooking. Oh, well, you have to heat it in the microwave. But I mean, that's it. It is simple, simple. If you want more of a challenge, I've also got a homemade marshmallow recipe on there that basically everybody can eat almost, but it's not vegan.
Oh, that sounds awesome. A couple of other things. Mandarin avocado salad with pomegranates. That's like very seasonal, isn't it?
It is. We're actually having that in 2 days for Thanksgiving because we're recording this before Thanksgiving, and we're having that this year for Thanksgiving.
Oh, I'll be right over. I see marinated mushrooms, sun-dried tomato recipe, make ahead dinners, bean sausage stew, lentils over rice. I'm so sad that we're going to run out of time. Oh, you even have a gluten and dairy-free sugar cookie.
I do, and that is the only recipe right now that is there that is not mine. It is Marlana Boyer's, and she's a wonderful food blogger. She runs a great Facebook group, and she allowed me to put that on my thing because it's also vegan. So it's gluten-free, dairy-free, and egg-free, which is really, really hard to do. And she's perfected that recipe.
Well, of course, everybody makes, well, lots of people make cookies at this time of the year. So, yeah, thank you to Marlana. Thank you to you. Why don't you mention one more time, where people can find these resources so that they can make great food and enjoy the celebration?
Absolutely. My website is foodsensitivityKitchen.com, and as well as the recipes, the podcast episodes are there. You can find them in Apple Podcast or Spotify or all kinds of different places you can find them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's called the Sensitive Kitchen Podcast. But as well as the podcast, there's also then blog posts with recipes and lots of pictures and all those kinds of things. I also have a brand new holiday quiz because this can be really stressful for people. So you can say, what's my number one holiday food stressor? And I have some practical suggestions. So the quiz is also on the website on the very first page.
Well, that's really helpful. Well, one thing you mentioned in what you sent me is this phrase that I really appreciate. And it's this. You said it's hard work, it's challenging, but it's worth it. And would you like to make a few closing remarks before we run out of time today?
I would love to, because I would like to update you on my second grader.
Mm-hmm.
He is now a junior in college. He has done amazingly well. He's part of an elite research program. He's headed to Madrid in the January. When he started getting sick his freshman year in college from eating dorm food, he could cook for himself. I'm not saying this to brag on him. I'm saying this is possible, but it took a lot of hard work and a lot of perseverance. But he learned a lot of life lessons from this too. And so I want to encourage you that if you're in this difficult journey, not only come along with me, but it's possible and it's worth it, even if it's exhausting. And I'll be honest with you, some days it's exhausting. But come walk this challenging journey with me. I would love to hear from some of you. Email me at cindy@foodsensitivityKitchen.com or go to my website, leave me a comment. And I hope there are many recipes there that you and your family can use. I do talk about how to modify some of them.
Oh, good.
Kinds of sensitivities and allergies.
Wow. Well, thank you, Cindy Sullivan, for being with us today on Ravings and Cravings Radio on Good Company WILI. Going to look forward to sharing the link with you after Matt makes it live. Thank you for your time and for your expertise. I mean, this has been how many years in the making?
Many. My son is now a junior in college, and he was in second grade.
So would that be like 20 years in the making or something like that? So we can benefit from all of the time and energy and experimenting that you've done in your kitchen. So guys, nobody needs to go without during the holidays. Have a great rest of your evening. This is Ravings and Cravings signing off.